Yeah. Vietnam War.
What was your branch of service?
United States Army Medical Corps.
And what was your highest rank?
Captain.
And what general locations did you serve?
My duty stations were in Fort Benning, Georgia, and in Vietnam. Tui Wa, Vietnam.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
And where were you living at the time?
I was a resident at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. That's State University, New York, downstate.
Do you recall the date you were drafted?
Generally, I was drafted the same month that Medicare started, January 1966. I remember that well.
About being drafted.
Excuse me?
How did you feel?
I wasn't happy, but it was a busy time in my life. But I wasn't going to go run away to Canada. I mean, the standards set by the vets that I knew in World War II, really, just I had too much respect for that to ever demean that. And of course, the older vets before that, but the ones in World War II I knew personally because it was even my uncles and my older brother.
Now, in the interview before, you talked about you were a typical 60s guy, you were annoyed for being drafted.
Well, it really interfered with my training. I my training, 4 years of medical school, and after a bachelor's degree in pre-med, internship. My specialty required a total of 4 to 5 years, 1 year of which had to be general surgery. The remainder was in urology. And they were in 2 different institutions. I took all of my training in St. Louis University School of Medicine through medical school, and then in the same medical community, I took my year of internship and general surgery. I was a general surgical resident at St. Louis City Hospital Number 1, and City Hospital Number 1, like all city hospitals, is excellent training, unbeknownst to me at the time, for anyone going to a place like a war zone like Vietnam, because you see so much trauma, stabbings, gunshot wounds, all kinds of misery in the inner cities that they do each other.
Did you feel like you were well prepared when you went over to Vietnam?
I felt I had a little edge on the guys who had a more polite training. I didn't start my training in the city hospital in St. Louis. I started my post-medical school training in a hospital as an intern. But it was a hospital. It was a rotating internship, and we didn't see a lot of trauma. We saw a lot of disease, but we didn't see a lot of trauma. But I also had very little responsibility in my internship year. I was personally disappointed with it because, you did a lot of long duty hours, but, and the attendings would discuss cases with you sometimes, and they always asked a lot of you, but they wouldn't oft times give it back to you. And so when it came time to move on to my training, I moved into the city hospital where I knew the workload was very heavy, and there was a lot of experience, and that certainly was what the city hospital was. And my year in a general surgery city hospital in St. Louis, and then I went to a city hospital in the city of New York, State University of New York, downstate in Brooklyn, at Kings County Hospital.
So you went to your training in Fort Benning, Georgia? Your training was in Fort Benning, Georgia?
Oh, my duty in Fort Benning, Georgia was just, I did dispensary work in the morning and ran an examining station in the afternoon. I did essentially no operations. And it was just a paperwork existence. Not very rewarding.
So you didn't go to boot camp?
Oh no, I took what they call, I guess you'd call it a indoctrination or primary orientation at Fort Sam Houston for about 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. And we'd go down there and they'd teach us how to salute and, and Army protocol. And also they'd give us some information on treating battlefield injuries. I know that we used to have to debride wounds on goats that had been shot and that kind of stuff. But essentially it was that kind of an existence, stateside work. At Fort Sam, and nothing more than that.
Do you remember any of your officers?
Yes and no. And at Fort Benning, I do. I mean, at Fort Sam, we were just learning how to put our uniforms on. In fact, I stood inspection one in my dress blues, and I thought I looked fine, but the guy who was inspecting me asked where all my insignias were because I had my Army insignias on this nice blue dress blues. I thought it looked fine, but I was a civilian at heart, I guess.
So after Fort Sam, where did you go?
Then I went to Fort Benning for about a year and a third. And then after that, I was sent to Vietnam. That's what they call a short timer. But I was sent to Vietnam.
So what did you do at Fort Benning?
At Fort Benning, as I said, so I did dispensary work and ran a physical examining station in the afternoon assignment. And do the emergency room on every so many nights, do that.
When were you shipped out to Vietnam?
It was in the summer of '67, in the early summer, maybe late spring. I guess about May.
What was your first impression when you arrived in Vietnam?
The Vietnam, you don't have a lot of impressions. The main thing you're impressed with, they might say, is saving your own hide, because it's a war zone. And although I thought I wasn't uptight, you can't help but be uptight. I remember when we landed, got off the plane, I saw these Vietnamese running around with black trousers and shirt on, and these straw hats that looked like like a cone, At any rate, I thought they were the enemy, but they were working for the Americans, and that's what it was. I think when we get into the slides, you'll see, you'll get a better idea of what that's like.
Was it difficult to say goodbye to your family?
Yes and no. Yes and no. When I went to Vietnam, I had 2 young babies. Well, my wife and I had 2 young babies. My youngest son was only about 3 months old. So there was that aspect of it,
What was your assignment when you were in Vietnam?
I was assigned to an evacuation hospital, 91st Evacuation Hospital, in Vietnam. That's spelled Tuyhoa. it'll be easier with the slides.
Did you see any combat?
Not really. I saw some shooting around the hospital. We used to go out onto refugee camps, and the doctor was commanding officer when we did that. You know, you didn't know where the enemy was, and that was an overriding concern. You know, you're going to run into Charlie someplace, and then you saw just a bunch of sick people. The main thing in Vietnam that gets your attention is the casualties. That's what we sort of focused on. That was our main reason to be.
What did you see in the refugee camps?
What did I see in there? You'd see the treatment in a refugee camp was not very adequate. I mean, there was no follow-up. You'd make heavy diagnoses without the use of technology. I remember one day I diagnosed an X-ray. So, you know, we'd send him to the provincial hospital for an X-ray, and then no one. After the X-ray was done, the patient might have gone to a provincial hospital.
Were there casualties in your unit?
That's what we treated. Not at my unit, thank God. We had a couple of corpsmen get sick and nurses get sick, and even some doctors, but not the battle casualties.
What was a typical case for you? A typical patient?
A typical case?
A typical patient, yeah.
Gunshot wound, frag wounds, you know, injured soldiers or injured Vietnamese. A lot of civilians. 9 out of every 10 patients I took care of Vietnam were Vietnamese, not troops, not troops either. We took care of Army, Marine, Navy, American troops, and then we took care of South Vietnamese Army troops, and we took care of North Vietnamese Army troops and Viet Cong.
You took care of the Viet Cong?
Yeah, we took care of all comers in our hospital, and then they were sorted out afterward. But yeah, we took care of all of them.
How did you feel about treating the enemy?
Well, it's something you got to do, and you just let your duty to the patient override any political things. You gotta. If you start treating them with a prejudice, it makes it very difficult to treat them, and I don't think you'd achieve anything beneficial.
Were they receptive to the treatment?
Some of them were. Most of them were afraid of us, as you might expect, and then once they came to trust you, I remember one Viet Cong I took care of was a teenage Vietnamese boy, and first time he saw me, he was afraid of me, and you could see it in his face. And then after the first or second days he was in the hospital, he was in with burns, and after I did several dressing changes, he was appreciative of it. I couldn't speak Vietnamese, but he bowed to me, and you know, and show his gratitude that way. And unfortunately, that guy was supposedly captured by the Koreans, and the Koreans wanted him back. They didn't want him in an American hospital. And overseas, over in Asia, soldiers are not taken prisoner; they're just executed. That's the philosophy of Asian warfare. They never signed any of the Geneva Conventions, and Asians are that way. And I did everything I did to keep this kid in the hospital the longer I could, but I had really no other way. I had to let him go when he healed up, and I tried to follow him, through the scuttlebutt circuit, but I heard he only lasted 2 days before he died.
Were your hospitals well supplied?
Pretty well, yeah, pretty well.
How was the food?
Horrible. I'm sure we got reasonable food, but the guys in the kitchen didn't care to make it good tasting, and the supply. We had a warrant officer or a supply officer. It was rumored that he was selling the rations on the black market. I don't know whether that's true, but I do know that they didn't. I mean, we were lucky compared to the poor troops living in the jungle. But we'd come by in the cafeteria, you'd see the same vegetable served for lunch and for dinner, in the same serving tray. It's a tropic. And they tasted like it was the same vegetable at both times. There was very little care at that. And then if we could arrange, you might say, a meal through an unauthorized source, oftentimes was much better if we could do that.
What source was this?
Well, going to the Air Base Officers Club. A unit in a sub area, there was an air base. And we took care of their casualties, and we had all the doctors and nurses had a standing invitation to the Air Officers Club. And they used to fly steaks in once a week. So we'd go over there.
On steak delivery day?
That was a must.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Letters. Most of the slides you're going to see are from.
What was the stress and the pressure?
You're young. You just get into it. You get blue and depressed. I couldn't get used to doing the same thing 7 days a week. I'd try to go to church on Sunday, but you'd work, same thing every day. Make rounds, take care of casualties, wearing your uniform. So I evolved the system. Once I got so moody, I evolved a system where Sunday was my day of rest, even if I had to work. So I wouldn't do any work on Sunday that I could put off to Monday. Still made rounds on Sunday. If a dressing needed changing, it was changed on Sunday. If it could be put off to Monday, it was put off to Monday. And the main reason to change a dressing was if the bandages had soaked through, and we had to redo the bandaging. But there's medical considerations otherwise that overrode most of those things, not the day of the week, though.
You weren't given a day off?
Excuse me?
Yourself?
Yeah, mostly. Give yourself. Sometimes you got to get older for the nurse to do it. If the nurse didn't do it the way you like it, you did it yourself.
Was there anything special you did with love or any charms you kept with you?
No, I just had I had a holy medal around my neck, that's all.
Do you still have it?
Yep. I'm almost afraid to take it off.
You wear it?
Yeah.
How did you entertain or pass the time?
Well, we're all in the same kettle of fish, but our hospital was right on the South China Sea. So we're right on the beach. So, we were lucky. So we could, if we didn't have duty, we could go swimming if the season permitted it. And because of the temperature down there, it was warm enough to go swimming just about all the time, except during the monsoon season. The surf was so heavy they took it off. They put it off limits because we had lost an airman. We had lost an American GI to the ocean. One of these waves came and knocked him off his feet, and he was sucked out. And when We never found him again.
Was the hospital in a safe zone? Did it ever come under fire?
Yes and no. Thank God it was never really stormed, though. We were never stormed. There were gunshot wounds. One time I remember there were some bullets overhead, but I don't know what that was about. But it certainly quieted things in the doctor's quarters quite quickly. But nothing ever came of it.
Did you sustain any injuries? Did you sustain any injuries?
No. You know, infections and stuff, but that's all.
See any USO shows?
Well, we saw some Vietnamese USO shows. I didn't see any USO shows from this country. Bob Hope was supposed to come to a hospital, but that fell through. So, I mean, that was the scuttlebutt he was coming.
Did you go on leave or R&R?
Went on R&R. That was wonderful. The government gives you 5 days over there, and they'll fly you any place to meet your family, any place outside of the United States. You cannot come back to the States. And then, but we had to pay for our family's travel, and the least expensive place to meet my wife was in Hawaii. I would like to have gone to Australia. Could have gone to Australia, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Japan, but those were all very expensive places. Airfare to Australia was about $1,100 at that time, round trip. So this is $1967. You know.
So you enjoyed seeing your family?
Oh yeah.
Humorous or unusual events while you served?
No, not off the top of my head. If we get into the slides, Kristen, I think it'll come together for you a lot better.
What did you think of your officers and your fellow servicemen?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. But a lot of the infantry type officers were sort of, I don't know. Some were admirable, some were a little less than admirable.
Do you keep in touch with anybody still?
Unfortunately, no. I often think about them, but I don't have their names and addresses. I mean, I don't have the addresses. And I kept up with my old roommate for a couple of years, and then you come home and you get busy and you fall apart, fall away.
Where were you when your service ended? Or how was your discharge?
I was discharged on my return from Vietnam. We landed in Fort Lewis, Washington, and then I went through separation, did all the separation paperwork and final paycheck, and then they discharged me really in the Seattle, Washington area. And I flew home, and after I arrived home, you know, there was really nothing to do when I arrived home except that I did come home with an intestinal parasite. I was sick. I was afraid I had a bowel infection, and in fact I did have a bowel infection, and I didn't want to bring it home to my boys, my little babies. So I ran a stool examination in Vietnam, and it came back negative. But I was still alarmed enough, still passing blood, so I went to a naval hospital where I came home to my family, and even though I was an Army doctor, they were glad to take care of me. In fact, I knew some of the guys I had worked with before I was drafted, and within a day or two after taking medicine, Will my symptoms settle down?
So you were happy about being discharged, of course.
Oh, of course. Best thing in the world is coming home.
What was your homecoming like?
Oh, it's nothing. This is probably very dramatic, but Kristen, when we came home, we had a long flight from Cam Bay, Vietnam, to Tokyo International Airport for final fueling, and then we had an 11 or a 12-hour leg over Alaska. And when we landed at Fort Lewis, Washington, it was a cold night. It was a cold night, and we just had summer fatigues on. We didn't have any winter uniforms. But I still got off the plane, I kneeled down and kissed the ground. Picked up my duffel bag and went into the buildings to get processed out. But it was good to get home.
Where was your family living at the time?
Long Island, New York.
And how old were your boys?
When I got home, well, they were still babies. My son was 1 and 2 essentially. 1 and 2, yeah, in round numbers.
What did you do in the days and weeks afterwards, upon coming home?
What did I do and what?
What did you do upon coming home? Did you go back to work?
Kristen, that's a very complicated thing, and that has to go with being drafted at a residency. When I came home, a peculiar set of circumstances were intertwined, and you may not appreciate it. But Medicare had started, and I was in a city hospital, and Medicare, the wards essentially emptied out. It, when I was drafted, I went back to my old hospital in Brooklyn and to say hello to the girls there, and I said to the charge nurse, I said, where is everybody? How come the beds are all empty? Because when I was prior to being drafted, I'd be there and 20 bed wards had 28 beds in them, and 6-bed wards had 8 or 10 beds in them, and we commonly had people in the hallway. And when I went back, it was half empty. And I knew for training purposes, this would really compromise the training program I was in. And I had a very nice professor, Dr. Waterhouse at the time, and he had a popular training program, and according to the law of the land, he was obligated to give me my old job back. But I would have been an extra. He had expanded the residency from 2 chief residents a year to 3 chief residents a year, and this in the face of a declining patient population. So I thought it would be best for me to seek another program, and I was fortunate in finding a spot.